So the Sony ZV-1 and the ZV-E10, I get a ton of questions asking what's the difference between these two cameras. They sound pretty similar. They're pretty much the same price. Don't they just do the same thing? No. And I'm going to explain why in this video. Now, I want to say that I love them both and I have both, used them both in different scenarios. And by the end of this video, my hope is that you'll know for sure which one is right for you. But I feel we need to put these two cameras side by side and see what the differences are and the similarities as well. Now, honestly, this has been a really hard video for me to make. I started scripting out this epic comparison between the two of them over a month ago, and then I was just thinking, this isn't what you want. My customers typically just want to know, look, if you say get this, then I'll get it, with a bit of rationale as to why. You don't really want to hear that detailed specification and breakdown. That's what I'm aiming to do for this one, as brief and simple as possible, and then we will follow up and we will do some more in-depth reviews on both of these cameras, but ultimately, which camera should you get for which scenario? So let's first compare the prices. Now, as of today, the ZV-1 in the US is $748 and the ZV-E10 is $798, so $50 between them. Then let's compare the two of them physically. The major difference is that on the ZV-1, we've got a fixed lens. We can't change this out and out of the lenses. We'll look at that a little bit more in just a minute. Then size, that ZV-1 is much smaller. And while that's not too important if we're setting this up on a tripod in the office and never actually moving it, it does make a difference if you want a camera to be able to take out and about with you. Moving around the camera, both of them have got the same size flip around screen so you can see yourself when you're filming like this. Both have got similar menus and the buttons on the back are very much the same. It's all just been shrunk down on the back of the ZV-1, which if you've got big fingers like mine, it can be a little bit fiddly getting in there, but that's the trade-off. Now, neither of these cameras has what's called an electronic viewfinder, an EVF, that you would look through. And again, it's not a problem if we're setting up and recording like this in an office. You wouldn't even use it. It just means that if you're taking this out and about, you're relying on shooting with that screen and not holding it up to your eye to look through. If that's an issue for you and you want one of these cameras that's got that viewfinder in, then I definitely recommend you have a look at the A6400. It's pretty much the same body as the ZV-1, it's just got that EVF in it. And we've compared that one to the ZV-E10 in this video. Both of these cameras have got external microphone inputs, meaning that we can add additional microphones, improved microphones, and bring the feedback into the camera. The ZV-E10 benefits from the newer USB-C connection, and it also has a headphone jack, but unless you're filming somebody else when you're out in the field, you're unlikely to actually be plugging in headphones and monitoring it anyway. Now, one of the main things that really niggles me with the ZV-10, and to be honest, it's probably the only thing that annoys me about it, is the placement of the cables. Now, I put these cables on when I'm live streaming like this. I've got a HDMI output cable. Sometimes I might have a microphone cable coming out, and potentially you might want to use the USB as well as a power input. And they're all there right in front of that screen. Who on earth thought of this design? In contrast, the ZV-1 sends the cables out of the opposite side. So that's a big plus. Now we're finally coming around to the front of the camera, and I want to discuss the biggest difference with these cameras. Now, ultimately, the ZV-1 is a compact camera. It shouldn't even be in here, but it's so good. Although you can't change this lens, it's got a zoom on it that's the equivalent to a 24-70 on a full frame camera, and an aperture of, check this out, 1.8 to 2.8. That's better than any zoom you'll buy. If you pulled this out and started to film or take some photos, no one would believe what a little powerhouse you have in such a small body. So having a built-in zoom lens makes this camera small, it makes it simple to use, and without too much compromise. So why did Sony bring out an upgraded model that includes the ability to change lenses? Well, we're going to demonstrate that rather than talk through it. So I'm going to switch this out and let's have a look. Our fixed prime lens is 23mm on the ZV-E10. So first off, we're going to put the ZV-E1 up. This is it set to the equivalent of that 23mm. And I got to tell you, this took ages to get this zoomed in just right. So this is the ZV-E10 with the kit lens, and we're hitting the same kind of 23mm distance, but we can't get this one any wider in aperture than 4.5. And then this is 23mm on the ZV-E10 using a prime lens. Firstly, let me just show you it at 2.8, and then why don't we take this thing wide open? This thing goes to f1.4. Let's use it. Isn't that gorgeous? So now with them side by side, can you see the difference between the ZV-1 and the ZV-E10 with a kit lens on it, and then the ZV-E10 with this 24mm lens on there? And this is the lens that we've got on our 2022 gear guide that you can find down in the description, along with everything else that we use. All three options are set up exactly the same with 2.8 as an aperture, but notice how the ZV-1 doesn't do such a good job of blurring that background. We've got a fair distance to the background here. If your background was closer to you, then you're going to notice even more that it really isn't doing anything to blur that out. The benefit of having a camera with interchangeable lenses is I can upgrade them, and as a professional photographer, I love prime lenses, and we made this video here recently discovering why you should upgrade to a prime lens, so I don't need to go into great detail here. Again, as a photographer, I know the benefits of investing in nice lenses. I've collected lenses that are 15-year-old and still doing an incredible job, and while I upgrade cameras when new technology comes out, the lenses tend to stay. And you might not realize this, but actually it's the lenses that make the biggest difference to your image than actually the camera. I don't want to sound like a snob, but honestly, I would never use the kit lens that comes with a camera because they're usually pretty basic. In short, a prime lens is one that you can't zoom in and out on. It's a fixed distance, but it will give you much better quality results. Typically, the aperture will go wider, letting in more light, meaning you don't need such powerful lights in the room around you, and you can blur the background more dramatically. Plus, it will give you a sharper image. Hopefully you can see that in these examples. Now you might be thinking, well, that's not such a big difference. I could live with that. And to be honest, I used the ZV-1 for a few months as my main camera doing this. It's a lovely little camera, and honestly, it blows me away how versatile it is. But the biggest flaw for me, and this is the reason I'm advising against using this camera for making videos in this kind of scenario, is the fact that I always have to turn on and reset the zoom, and it's totally trial and error. There are no numbers in there that I can set this to. It's very hard to get it exact and repeatable. The remote does help a bit, so I can stay in place while I'm adjusting it, but it's still a faff. On my ZV-10 with a prime lens, I just turn it on and think about nothing. Honestly, that is priceless. And in my Pro Video Academy, where I'm promising to make it as simple as possible to get results like this, I want my customers coming back saying, I can't believe how simple it is. Not, what a faff trying to set this up. At least on the ZV-10, if you're using the kit lens that comes with it, you do get numbers on the display, so you can see what millimeter, what distance you're zooming in at. But it still is a little bit hard landing it on exactly the same one. And it's seconds that I don't want to be messing around with when I'm trying to get myself going. My customers just want their cameras to work. Flick it on, nothing else. And unless you're going to settle on the widest zoom, which is what it defaults to every time on the ZV-1, you're not going to get that simplicity out of it. But it's not a write-off for the ZV-1. Let's continue. Both of these cameras can output 4K at 25 or 30 frames per second, although the ZV-1 will crop in at 4K. And if you ever wanted to record some dramatic slow motion B-roll footage, then both will give you up to 100 or 120 frames per second at 1080p. That means you're making footage that you could play back 4 times slower. The battery life is about twice as long on the ZV-10, but that's not too surprising when you see the size of them side by side. Again, for use like this when it's sitting at the desk, that won't be a problem because you won't use batteries anyway. You're either going to be using USB for power or a dummy battery. All I'd say if you buy a ZV-1 is get a couple of batteries to go with it. Really, they're very inexpensive on Amazon, so not a problem. So which camera should you buy? Well, for this setup, quality and simplicity are my priorities. And the ZV-E10 is an outright winner due to the ability to add prime lenses and blow out that background. And because I only have to do this and I'm away. If your priority is to be able to travel with this camera and you want something as small as possible to keep on you, then the ZV-1 offers a smaller body and the convenience of having a great zoom built in. It can slip into your pocket and you would hardly know it was there. Plus, with the ZV-E10, you got to make a decision about which lens you're going to take with it. Or if you're like me, you'll end up needing to take a bag with a few options in it. And that difference in the depth of field that we're seeing here, that blurry background, isn't going to be an issue when you're outdoors typically. Plus, the ZV-1 has an ND filter built into it, so you don't even need to be thinking about that either. And if you haven't got a clue what an ND filter is or why you need one, check out this video. I personally love having both of these cameras. The ZV-10 permanently in front of me, the ZV-1 can come out with me, or actually it makes a great second camera in the studio, especially if I want to mount something overhead looking down, because it's just so small and light. And that repeatability that has been an issue to me won't be a problem in that scenario. So hopefully that's helped. The Sony ZV-E10 is such a fantastic camera. We're crowning it the best camera of 2022 for video. And if you want to look closer and see why, then check out this video next. Thank you so much for being here. Please give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it. Leave us any questions or thoughts in the comments and be sure to subscribe so we can bring you more content just like this. Thank you.